and this is going to be spicy, guys. This is going to be spicy. We're going to talk about DPS meters. And if you haven't seen my previous public service announcements on DPS meters, it goes something along the lines of shut the hell up about DPS meters. DPS meters are going to exist in Ashes of Creation. There is absolutely no way to stop DPS meters from existing. DPS meters will exist as long as there is a combat log in some sort of format. You can make it as difficult as not having an exportable combat log. You can make it as difficult as not having the combat log be copy and pasteable. However, we live in the year 2021, and there are screen readers for the visually impaired that can translate what's seen on the screen into a text format or to a spoken format, and you can actually export it into a text format for, you know, for easeability. It's an access thing. Now, some people keep saying we need to have DPS meters. You don't need to have DPS meters. You need a combat log. You need access to your combat log, because then you take one of these and you take one of these and you write down all the information, and then you start hand jamming it. And then you come to a PowerPoint guru like me, and you're like, hey, Jay, can I get your DPS PowerPoint Google Sheet or Excel spreadsheet? And then all a DPS meter is automation of a manual process. Now, people have said, how can people improve without DPS meters? And that is a very valid point. And I thought about this, and I said to myself, how do you get better at any other task in practice? However, anything that is subjective, you must immediately throw out. So how do I get better at cooking? Well, you don't actually ever get better at cooking to anybody but yourself. How do I get better at painting? You don't ever get better at painting to anybody but yourself, because there are people who think the Mona Lisa is trash. There are people who think that Starry Night is a horrible painting, and I punch those people in the face. But when you're looking at cooking, or you're looking at something subjective, you have to realize that you're only getting better for yourself, and then if other people enjoy it, great. How do I get better at being a better on-air personality for this show? Sure, there's a lot of things that a coach would tell me that I should do. You should avoid politics. You should avoid spicy topics. You should avoid rants. Well, I'm not going to do any of that stuff. If I have to do that stuff in order to get more popular, then I don't want to be more popular. But when you talk about how does somebody improve in a video game, you need the numbers, because it becomes, how do you get better at running a mile and a half? Well, one of the ways you get better at running a mile and a half is to run 3 miles. But the only way you get better, which better in this case equals faster, is by knowing what you ran today, what you ran 3 weeks from now, what you ran 6 weeks from now, what you ran 12 weeks from now. That's an objective number. In what amount of time did I traverse 1.5 miles? In what amount of time did I do 10,000 damage? How much damage did I do in this amount of time? How long did it take us to kill this boss? Now, if you need a DPS meter to get better, you're only playing the numbers game. No, that's a false statement, and that's where we get the spice and the controversy. We get the spice and the controversy in things. I like what the Division 2 does. At the end of each raid, you get a detailed breakdown of all the numbers so you can plan again before restarting. Yes, I think that works. I think what Revelation Online did worked really well. If you don't have an add-on for a DPS meter, somebody is going to come up with something anyway. And then, again, listen to what I'm saying. You can't stop DPS meters from existing if you give people access to a combat log. And the moment you give people access to a combat log, people are going to either make spreadsheets or do it manually or rewatch videos or do whatever they need to do. I don't have a problem with DPS meters because the DPS meter itself is a tool. I have a problem with the majority of elitists who kick people out of their raids because their DPS was 7,994 instead of 8,001. When you get to that level, when you get to that level of precision, I think you're being ridiculous. Except the problem is taking out the DPS meter isn't going to change that, because guilds will just figure out new ways to do it. If you give people a score at the end of their if you give people a score at the end of their dungeon, they know what to improve on. But how do you know if you have the rotation down right? How do you know which abilities do better than others? Because unless you give everybody 100% of the uncloaked facts in the skill window, then there's always room for error. And then how do you figure out, how do you decipher the boss mechanics if you don't have an objective number at the end? How do you know if I have a frost mage, a fire mage, and a lightning mage, how do I know which mage is best for that boss? And some people would say, well, the mages can talk between themselves afterwards. Yeah, and they can, and they will. But now you're talking about the most minor of differences. I think if players are worried that much about their numbers, taking away their DPS meter isn't going to change those players. It ignores the quantifiable metrics and focuses solely on qualifiable metrics and focuses solely on quantifiable. Are you punting a member you help with leadership and communication? Are you punting a member that brings enjoyment to the game for others? Again, I agree with you for the top 5% elitists. I tell the same story all the time when it comes to the topic of DPS meters, and the conversation is this. My wife had only been playing video games, other than like, Nintendo when you're like 8 years old. My wife had only been playing video games for about 3 months. We went to WoW. She played Warlock. I played Mage. I was the number 2 Mage on Airy Peak. And the Mage, a Horde Mage couldn't be the number 1 slot because of the offhand that the Alliance could get. I was the number 2 geared Mage on Airy Peak. My wife was in like the top 300 for Warlocks. Her DPS should have been about 8,000. We went to a raid and we couldn't clear KT at Nax, and we took a break and the mages all got sent to do their thing because the mages DPS is all like inside the markers. The guild leader pulls Tamir into a room because the guild leader also happened to be the Warlock class officer. Pulled her into a room and said, hey, what's going on with your DPS? Because with your gear, your DPS should be in the 6,000-7,000 range, and you're in like the 4,400 range. And she said, well, this is my rotation. Somehow my wife had learned something wrong about her rotation. She had an ability in the wrong spot. And as soon as we made that one change, the next time we tried KT, we burned the boss because my wife went from like the bottom, like 10%. I think she was just above the healers at that point, the healers and the tanks. She went from there to top 5 by moving one ability in her rotation. That's all it took. That is a great example of using a DPS meter because you identify the person who's not performing and you talk to them. Other guilds would have looked at a Warlock and they would have said, right click, kill, and let's recruit somebody else. You can't change how people are going to use the tool. And I love Steven's optimism that by taking out the DPS meter and by not putting the hooks in to build DPS meters, that it's going to change gamers, and it absolutely isn't going to change gamers. Yoshi P has said we don't allow parsers. In Final Fantasy XIV, the parser is not allowed. If you get caught using the parser, you get a 3-day ban on the first offense. Somebody said, well, how would you ever know if somebody was using the parser? Well, one guy got banned because he was using it on his stream. One guy got banned because he sent a message to the person when they kicked him. He said, "Look, scrub, your DPS is way too low. Get better." Well, they banned the guy for 3 days because they said, you only way you would know if his DPS was too low is if you were using the parser. Now, I can tell you right now that you can't use the I can tell you right now that you can't use the aggro scale in Final Fantasy to know the damage, because healers can jump to the number 2 spot and just throw that off. Do you like not having add-ons as well? If so, why? I don't like add-ons. I don't think people play WoW. I think people play Deadly Boss Mod, Dance Dance Revolution. I don't need add-ons. I add on, right? Add on. I have multiple add-ons on my desk. They're called notepads. But then again, I'm old. With a zillion different build possibilities, isn't it kind of a moot point for someone to say you're a mage, you should be doing X DPS? No, I don't. Because here's the thing. If your job is a mage, your role is a damage dealer. If your role is a damage dealer, then your goal should be to produce as much damage as possible. Now, the sewer boss in Nexramas after patchwork, one of the mages always had a lower DPS on that fight because one of the mages was responsible for being in the right place at the wrong time to Frost Nova all the ads. Nobody yelled at the Frost Mage who had CC responsibility on that boss, and the few times people did, they got told to shut the hell up because the mages didn't want to take turns. So I ran Frost Mage for that particular encounter, and I put my elemental on one side of the room and I stood on the other side of the room, and I manually controlled our 2 Frost Novas so that I made sure none of the ads got to the front of the room. That was my job. Why is my DPS only 4,100 on this fight? Because I can't reach the boss from back here, and it's more important for me to be standing back here than it is for me to be applying 8,000 DPS but letting all those ads get up there. In that situation, a good guild, a good raid leader is going to say, I know why Jay's damage was 4,000 less on this boss, because he was doing his job. I know why the healers on this fight did no damage, because there is a lot of AoE. There's a lot of AoE. There's a lot of AoE going on. So do I think that they need to provide people an output of their damage? Yes. Do I think that the combat log satisfies that requirement? Yes, I do. Do I think that people need to stop bringing up DPS meters? Yes. Guilds are going to have a DPS meter of some sort. To try to fight that is not going to happen, because if nothing else, I'm going to have the camera running. I'm going to have OBS running on my combat log, and all I'm going to do is the part of my screen is going to be chopped up in OBS, and I'm going to have it fucking in 4K in OBS, right? So you can't stop people from getting their damage. Even if you make the combat log not copy and pasteable, the people who want to go to the nerd level are going to nerd out and go to the nerd level. I like that screen. It's very useful, but it doesn't really make the game bad. We go over the screen and see what we're not doing enough of, and the game makes you feel like you know what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, maybe.
I say, Sprocket, we've reached the end of another video. Time to thank the sponsors. Yes, that will do, that will do. Shall we pop off for a spot of tea?